Right. Thank you so much to the organizers for including our paper as part of the program. I'm very excited to get feedback on our paper on social media comments. So in the earlier days of social media platforms, at some point that people have idealized social media as the public square. This idea that social media provides a space for people to share information, but also promote discussions. This is, 2017. A lot of things have evolved since then, and you might imagine that ideal may or may not have borne out. But one important feature of social media platforms is the comment section. So the comment section allow users to interact with the initial content creator, allow users to interact with each other, react, debate, and potentially interact. So we see this commonly, for example, on many social media platforms, YouTube, Facebook, Reddit is one of those in which the comment section really is the dominant side of content. But in addition to that, we also see comment sections in many other online platforms, such as news sites. So why study the comment section? Comment section, on the one hand, creates value. On the one hand, with the comment section, it facilitates feedback directly from the users to the content creators. It promotes potential discussions among vertically as well as horizontally across who's exposed to the post. And then in the setting of an organization or a commercial product, it also promotes word of mouth. On the other hand, we also have the flip side of comment sections, where if the opinions are divergent and people are posting, more commonly than not, toxic content, that could potentially disrupt meaningful discourse, people to have a meaningful conversation. From the advertiser's perspective, if you have comment sections that are potentially toxic or potentially divergent, it could also pose brand safety risks. So if comments shape what people see and do, then content of those comment sections matter. And it's going to matter both for users as well as for advertisers. And we're going to argue that also matters to platforms as well as society at large. So what this paper does is first understand what is the effect of the presence of the comment section and the stance of the comment section on two things. I'm going to show three different sets of results, but mainly thinking about two sets of outcomes. One is thinking about on-platform user engagement. And then on the other side, thinking about off-platform effects on people's beliefs, attitudes, as well as behavior. What we do is we run two large experiments. One experiment is a field experiment on social media platform where we have ads shown to about 1 million users on Facebook in the US in partnership with one of the largest online racial justice organizations in the US. To understand the off-platform effects, we run a survey experiment on Prolific with about 5,000 users. And what we find has both implications for what advertisers should do, whether they should moderate comment and how they should moderate, for platforms in thinking about how comment sections should look, as well as for policymakers thinking about regulating social media platforms, as that's an important policy debate right now. We think about social media platform often as a whole thing together, but then more recently, there's been policymakers thinking about particular components of the social media platform and how do you regulate those particular components. So just to give you a preview of the results, we first find, and this is a descriptive result, there's nothing hollow here, we first find with racial justice posts, the comment section is dominated by opposing voices. So if you have a progressive post, many of those comments are going to be from conservatives. And then we look at what is the impact of the comment section on platform engagement. And from there, we see that, sort of unsurprisingly, having a comment section increases interactions and click on the post. But in addition to that, we find that effects are driven by opposing comments, which is when you have comments are opposing to the original post, that's when that's most effective in increasing those interactions. We also talk about some psychological mechanism here, thinking about curiosity and identity congruence as potential mechanisms that drive those results. I'll get into that once I talk about the results there. So that's on the on-platform outcomes. Off the platform, we see that the same comments that increase engagement, opposing comments, actually have negative or adverse effects on these off-platform outcomes. We find that with opposing comments, actually shift the attitude away from the original message. So basically make people less progressive and conservative, even more conservative, and moving in the opposite direction as what the advertiser would have intended. And then moreover, we even find that there's incentivized donations that drop with those opposing comments. So that basically points to a clear tension from this on-platform engagement, which often platforms try to maximize, versus off-platform outcomes that organizations might care about. Yes?
To what extent do you believe that some of these findings might be shaped a little bit by context? So if I'm understanding correctly, it was just the racial justice platform that you partnered with. So all of the ads are promoting an organization that's more left-leaning. And then we have this result, like especially in conservative areas, we see the effects are driven by opposing comments. But would we even expect to see any opposing comments in kind of more left-leaning areas, given the message that's provided? Or I guess maybe put differently, like if we run this, but with like a conservative organization, do we expect to find similar results but then flip?
Absolutely. If a referee asks us to, but not yet. This already, you can see, is already very costly and very, very hard to do. I'll try to get at externality a little bit, because right now, even though our posts are progressive, with the comment sections, we are experimenting with different kinds of comment sections, and we also have heterogeneity on the user side. So basically, there's already a bunch of different conditions that allow us to say something more general. But of course, yeah, we do think it may or may not be symmetric, but that's an open question. And then actually, just to build on it, everything we're looking at here, and I might not have a slide on this short talk. Think about this as in the context of potentially politically relevant issues, news organizations. We can imagine if you run a similar experiment with commercial products, this may or may not be. And this is one of the things that we talked about potentially looking at, and that would be a potential follow-up. And one of the things that we hope to do is we don't have a platform partnership to be able to run this. We hope to actually methodologically contribute to say, how do you study comment section, which is often endogenous? How do you study this in a way that can be exposed to a large set of diverse set of users? And then here is one potential methodological contribution that allows to do that in other settings as well.
Are you going to disentangle sentiment from like underlying viewpoints?
So not sentiment specifically in the slide. I will talk about, I think your question is getting at something like, is there something else about the content that's driving the results other than stance? And I'll talk about that a little bit. The context we study is comment sections, and I hinted at this earlier, which think about comment sections on posts from organizations. This is a relevant context to study because the comment section serves as a digital public square to talk about divisive issues, and this reflects opinions on issues and expose issues to viewpoints the individuals may actually disagree with. So think about people following organizations or news outlets. The comment section actually may be potentially more or less diverse than the posts themselves, because you can have anybody commenting on those comment sections. We partner with Color of Change, a nonprofit focused on racial justice and civil rights advocacy. The reason we focus on racial attitudes, both because Deng and I care about this very much, but also because racial attitudes is one of the most divided issues in the US. If you ask people, do white people benefit from advantages in society that Black people do not have? 80% of Democrats agree with that, and then it completely flips for Republicans. 22% of Republicans would agree with this statement, whereas 80% of Democrats agree with this. And this is surprisingly stable in the past few years. I'm going to go through this very quickly. So in order to develop the post that we show under which we experimentally vary the comment section, we developed and follow a protocol that we hope can be easily followed and replicable in other contexts. So what we did is we first identified key issues in collaboration with our partner organization, and we focus on 5 issues. So this includes voter suppression and criminal justice and so on. And then we hire 4 graphic designers online and assign each of them to focus on 2 to 3 key issues. We work with the partner organization to select the content that's most attention-grabbing, and then making sure that's also consistent with the breadth guidelines. And then if we're going to run experiments on Facebook, we also just piloted with A/B tests on Facebook. So these are the 5 posts that we ended up using. These are the 5 different topics, and then you can see that they're maybe a little bit hard to read in the room. It basically says here comment and share your thoughts below, and it's on a particular topic, and then it's a post, and then the thing that they can do is click to sign up for a newsletter. So the audience characteristic, and this is another opportunity for us to study the comment section. If you're posting these comments, this post yourself on the Meta platform, we're actually able to get directly from the platform gender and age data. So those are the only two things that we get from Meta's ad manager. In addition to that, we also were interested in location people were in. So using 2020 election results, because when we ran in 2024 wasn't available yet, we were able to target specific areas in which we characterize as 3 different categories. So it's either blue, where the Republican vote share is low, swing, where it's about in the middle, and then red, which is high Republican share. So let me just quickly talk about the descriptive part of our paper, which is generating those comment sections. And what does the comment section look like when you post conservative posts? So we're not claiming anything causal here. The results could be a function of both how users interact with the post as well as how the algorithm deliver those content. But this is just descriptively, if you run an engagement maximizing campaign, what's going to show up on the comment section. So engagement campaign, what we ran is we ran about 150 posts across those 5 creatives I showed you, and then across 30 zip code groups, sort of grouped by the 3 categories I have. We made sure each user is exposed to only 1 post, and then reached around 135,000 people out of a potential audience of 24 million. So these people are highly selected. This is the people that Facebook algorithm said these are the ones who are most likely to generate engagement, and then show the ad to these individuals. The objective of this is to generate these organic comments so we can use them in the main experiment. And then also just to say, how do people comment and who are the people who are most likely to engage when the algorithm chooses to show it. We're going to look at 2 types of outcomes. One is silent interactions, which we think about as likes and reactions. And the other is what we're studying in the comments, which we call local interactions, which includes both the direct comments to the post as well as replies to other users. And we also study the content of the, to Lena's earlier question, sort of the content of the post. We used most of these we labeled before, and then one important dimension that have been studied is the toxicity of the content. And then people have shown that toxicity could drive up engagement. And one of the things that we do is actually measure toxicity using the Google perspective. So on the left, we're showing progressive comments. I'll just read one to use understand what these are. They don't believe in us. Minorities have to work hard as always. And then on the right, you can endlessly funnel resources into set communities, but we'll always get the same. So you can imagine when we're thinking about brainstorming, like designing this study, you could have thought maybe Deng and I can comment on these platforms. Maybe we can create bots and then have like an AI generated comment section. From this experience, I'm very glad that we didn't do that and we had this comment generation stage, because the number of conservative memes I've seen and how creative and surprising they are as part of this comment generating process is something that I don't think Deng and I or AI at that point would be able to generate as well. Yes.
Sorry, the acronym of so I just want to clarify something. So you did experiments by having those posts, but you also generated, you also randomized the comments.
No, not yet. That's the second part. This is just the part where we're generating a comment section. So this is us doing an engagement campaign where we show these posts that doesn't have anything, show it to a bunch of people, and then generate a bunch of comments. The second part of the paper, I'll come to it, in which we actually talk about how do we randomize the comment section, which is really the methodology for randomization. Yeah.
So I didn't follow the 5 pictures very well, so how many of them are left-leaning?
They're all left-leaning.
Okay.
They're all left-leaning, but just on different topics, because our partner is the racial justice organization. So as to that earlier question from Justin, it's going to be all progressive. So, yeah. Yes.
So you mentioned about the A/B test, but you said like optimizing, which create show, like what or.
So the way it's shown is you target a particular area and audience, and then we're doing A/B tests across those 5 different designs. So again, like everything here, just talking about descriptive on this section. It just once you do the A/B test, who are the people who are shown and how we react? Yes.
these comments are generated by actual people.
Actually, people hate that. Yeah. Not me or Dante or our friends or thoughts.
I missed the part of AI.
Oh, I just meant like we thought about the design where you use AI, but then we decided not to because these are much more organic than anything we could have picked.
This is A/B testing on Facebook.
On Facebook, everything we do is gonna be on Facebook for the field research.
How is the A/B testing done? Is it give it the design and tell them you A/B test, or you actually do the randomization? So
I will get to that. So this part, just think about this. We're just picking the same set of audience and then showing them one.
fine.
So this is just
But within the audience, it's so hard.
yes, there's hard. Let me get to the causal part, but then I'll explain how that works. Yes.
No, very interesting work. So if you have this left-leaning organization that is showing these ads in right-leaning areas, they're not seeing this often. So it'll stick out to them. It's incongruent with how they feel, so it's gonna have effects versus progressively, you can see this so constantly that, I mean, click-through rate might address some of that or whatever it is, but how do you get at that?
No, that's actually part of the mechanism that we're thinking about. Like we are gonna see heterogeneity by ideology, both in this part as well as the later parts. So that there is a symmetry here, right? Because you have a progressive post and then you can have conservative comments or progressive comments, but then the response of progressive and conservative are gonna be. And I'm gonna talk about that as a potential psychological mechanism.
Yeah, because in a progressive feed, you're gonna see a ton of this.
Exactly.
In a conservative feed, you won't, so it'll really stick out.
Exactly. So keep that thought, and then we'll look at the results and let me know if the results are still interesting in that lens. So let me just quickly show descriptively who are people who are engaging on this post. And this is the result I already previewed. We see looking at the number of comments, just in terms of number of comments that were collected on these different posts, it is significantly higher in red areas versus swing areas or blue areas. I can actually also look at percentage of people who comment to that earlier point. Like I can calculate this number as a percentage of the impressions. It's the same pattern. So both the level of commenting as the rate of commenting for people who have shown the comments, we see this as it becomes more conservative in the area, it becomes more people commenting more. And then we see the opposite pattern when we look at number of reactions. So we have this dichotomy of vocal versus silent interactions. For silent interactions, we see that more conservative areas react and like less. So if you add the two, because silent interactions are much more common than the vocal ones, it's still not surprising that progressives are way, way, way more likely to interact. But if you just look at the vocal interactions, that's predominantly conservative. Yes.
Do you break out the sentiment around the reactions? There's like the angry face, which is maybe like in reaction to disapproval versus like thumbs up, so hard.
Yeah, that's what the great thing is. So you look at the supportive things and you can, supportive, it's a little tricky, right? Sometimes you have haha, angry face. There's all kinds of things. So for the supportive ones, it's been clear. So we just say hard, care, or like those are. Yes.
And is that because we know the default version for reaction is like.
Like, exactly.
Right, so
Could be part of that.
I see that.
Exactly. It could be part. Now let me just quickly show you a couple more results on descriptive. We'll now get to the causal part to understand the further. The other interesting result we find here is that there's significant heterogeneity by gender. So if you look at who is reacting, we see that women on the right here are much more likely to react than men. But if you look at comments, that's the opposite direction. So this is actually consistent with the literature in economics that talk about women voicing disagreement, and women are much less likely to voice disagreement in the context of, for example, disagreement on science. And then let me just make one last comment on the descriptive part here, which is it just because men are always more vocal or conservatives are more vocal that they just love to talk more? Is that a general pattern? And we see that everything we're looking at are progressive, but I can still look at by different topics. And we see that for some of these topics, like voting and police, you see a much greater gradient that the more conservative areas are, the more that conservatives talk. But we don't see that for some other topics, which are still within racial justice. but are potentially less polarized. Again, like, we just have a sample of 5, so I'm not going to generalize here, but this is to say that it's not always the case that conservative men like to talk. And then just to wrap this part up, to summarize, here we find sort of an obvious point that commenting is not the same as endorsement. We find that a small vocal minority, primarily men, those in conservative areas, dominate the comment section of racial justice. Because the levels of comments are just way higher from conservatives than progressives. And then progressives and women engage more, but they engage in a more silent form of engagement, and this is consistent with this gender difference in other contexts. Here's a little bit surprising because people are just commenting on posts on social media. It is potentially not as visible or important for career as some of these voicing for disagreement in science. So even documenting this pattern is potentially interesting. So now when we get to the causal part of the project. So the next part we're going to do is to use another field experiment to look at what is the effect of the comment section on platform engagement. So what we do is we use ads with comments that we generate from the first part, and we're basically leveraging a feature called remarketing to new zip codes. So when you remarket, you can keep all the interactions from before and then show that to a new set of users. So in this experiment, we were able to reach about 1 million users across 72 posts. And then the A/B test, to the earlier question on how we're doing the A/B test here. The A/B test that we're doing is that we're targeting within each zip code group. So basically people with similar location with similar ideology. And then we're doing a randomization using the A/B test, randomizing individual into one of 4 arms. It's either no comments, where this is our control condition, or one of the 3 that has the comments, where they see supportive comments, or opposing comments, or a mix of supportive and opposing. So we're doing an A/B test to the same set of audience, and then just showing them one of these 4 conditions using the on-platform features that allow us to randomize people into these conditions.
Facebook doesn't have one feature that allows you to reduce the target population to the target. I don't know, what was the objective you gave it when you said that?
Here is maximize reach.
Reach.
Yeah, I actually talk about divergent delivery, all that fun stuff. That was something that we're super concerned about. I'll talk about that. Yeah, yes.
So
We're very aware of this. I'll talk about that. Yes.
How do the like opposing or the mixed conditions, how does that handle like comment credit? So is it only a treatment on the top level comments only, or threaded comments even available at the time?
It is possible to have a reply as well. I'll talk about how we do it, but basically to answer your question is to make the condition really highly controlled. Each comment section just has 2 comments. So each of this, let's say it's opposing, it's just 2 opposing comments. If it's supportive, it's 2 supportive comments. If it's mixed, it's 1 supportive and 1 opposing. And then the things that we picked are usually without a reply. I'll show you some examples. So this is what it looks like. So under the no comment section, you still have reactions and shares. And one of the things that we learned is you can actually do a lot of things to manipulate how ads work. So what we did is actually equalize the number of shares across all conditions, and then make sure on average, when we have a set of 4 posts, that they're sort of on average having a same number of reactions. So here, if, for example, I have 83, 81, 86, and 80 across different conditions, but we also have a set of ads, because we have several different sets of basically the same post with different comment sections. We also have another set in which the average reactions are about 60. So you can vary the number of reactions, but then we're holding the number of shares the same, and then just making sure the stance is the one that's intended under each of the conditions. So the curated posts differ only in the comment section. We're trying to hold as much as everything else as much as constant as possible. And then to deal with one potential concern we had, which is SUTVA violations, that we're kind of worried that if as we run experiments, new comments are going to pop up, they're going to be visible to other users who are exposed to the same post. So we developed a tool which just live filters all the new comments. As they're coming in, they're just immediately hidden from all other users. And the thing about Facebook is when the comments are hidden, the commenter themselves actually do not know the comments are hidden. So the person doesn't know, but none of the other users can see the comments. That's one of the things that we use to leverage in order to avoid that SUTVA violation. In order to deal with potential bias from divergent delivery, we did a bunch of precautionary measures. So we split budget evenly, launched all ads simultaneous with the same duration. We capped impressions at 1 across the users, and then we optimized for reach. And then in order to minimize the effect of selection of who gets to show the post, we saturated all the audiences that we're trying to reach. So in the paper, we can, because Facebook audience estimates are not exact numbers and it fluctuates over time, and we can look at what is the audience reach over different estimates. Even in the most conservative estimate, our saturation is about 95%. So we're able to have a budget that's large enough, and that's why it's hard for us to run another experiment right away before getting referee comments, that we're able to saturate the audience and be able to reach all the zip codes and all the areas we're trying to reach. It was placed for Facebook feed, and then one other thing that may potentially help with this dealing with divergent ad delivery is that the creatives are basically identical, and we balance the reactions and shares. So the only thing that differ across these posts are the comment section. So to the extent that Meta, and we don't know for sure, is using the comment section to optimize on who is being shown the content, if that's not happening, then it's sort of not surprising that we're not seeing divergent. And just as a quick evidence that we don't see it, that divergent delivery, and oftentimes in papers that do document divergent delivery, it's not balanced on basic demographics that can be observed. And in our case, for the 2 different demographics that we can observe, which is age and gender, it's balanced across the conditions. That's another evidence that we don't have divergent. And then what we're going to look at is the effect of the comment section on user engagement. I'm going to just be a little faster here, skip this middle part. But in terms of outcomes, we're going to look at the total number of engagement in the form of clicking the post or the comments, and then post interactions, and then link clicks. Everything I'm going to show you is going to be the rate out of the reach of the number of users, because we reach similar number of users across the different conditions. You can also do this in levels, but everything I'm going to show you is going to be in rate, in percentage. So here's our first result, which is kind of not surprising, but nice to document, which is when you have a comment section versus not having a comment section, for subsequent engagement, it significantly increases that. And then we see that across all 3 common conditions, you see that increases the subsequent engagement. We can look at as another measure of potentially evidence against divergent delivery. We can look at how much are people clicking on the post, and to see the comment, you have to click on the post in order for the comments to show. We see that this is basically very similar across the 3 different conditions. And then I can look at some downstream outcomes on subsequent interactions. And first, I'm going to show just interactions on comments, reactions, and shares, and then with just a comment section versus not. It's a noisy no on this outcome.
Yeah. So are the results compared to the no comment?
Yes, all of them are compared to.
So is there an effect like because no one to be the first one? So I always do that on LinkedIn. So if I see others already say, even congrats. If I see others say, I will follow. If nobody says that. That's
totally possible. This idea that like engagement drives subsequent engagement, but then you can also look at, and I'm going to show you on the next slide, which is like link clicks, which is less about like this visible interaction. So here we see that the positive effect on the subsequent actions are potentially to your point, and then the other thing is like reactions maybe is less higher stake as comments. Adding all those things together, we see that the opposing comment section is the one that significantly drive up subsequent interactions. And then I can look at the number of link clicks, which again we see a similar pattern. So we see that opposing comment sections are the ones that significantly increase link clicks on the post after people are exposed to the post. I'm going to skip the robustness stuff, but basically you can do a bunch of different specifications and find that the results are robust. Yes.
You didn't say much about hypotheses. What do you think the results are teaching us?
Right. So I think there's a couple of things, and some of them are more practical, and then the other sort of thinking about what does this mean for social interactions. Just on the practical side, one of the things sort of we started with is thinking about how should we regulate the comment section? Should it be moderated? And then also, what should advertisers do to the comment section? You know, this is a common thing, even when we run like Facebook ads to recruit people, it's a very natural question to ask, which is, how do I deal with the comment section of my ad? Do I moderate it? Should I hide everything? Should I comment on it? My heuristic has always been don't hide the bad stuff necessarily, but maybe interact with them in a way that's funny or something else that generates more engagement. But in general, like here is just for advertisers thinking about this moderating comment section in that manner, and I'll review why and the potential trade-off there. And then another set of things that I was hoping to contribute to is thinking about how the social influence matter and through what channels and mechanisms might matter. And then over there, I'm going to get into a little bit more behavioral decline and the psychology of this, which I have kind of brief. So to sort of Olivia's earlier question, I don't have final sentiment yet, but one thing that's potentially related is what if results are driven by other characteristics other than steps? And then the paper, one dimension that's really relevant is what if the opposing comments are just more toxic than the supportive comments? In the comments that we selected, that's not the case. So if you look at the average toxicity across the conditions, it's not that they're significantly more toxic under the opposing comment section. And then moreover, we can do robustness checks in which we drop the comment sections that have really toxic comments, and the results are still robust. So we don't think this is just driven by toxicity. Those things might be correlated, but because we curated the comment section, we really didn't keep the really crazy stuff. So then on average, it's actually very.
Are we able to control for the likes on the comments or reactions?
That's something on our to-do list. Yeah, the interactions on the comment sections. And then we also find interesting heterogeneity on this as well, where we find that a lot of results are driven by men. Again, that men not only comment more, they're also more influenced by these comments on progressive posts. And then in terms of location, we see that a lot of results are driven by more conservative areas. So just to quickly summarize what we have found so far on the on-platform engagement, we find that comments potentially increase attention and then generate curiosity. And then comment section boosts engagement and reduce ad cost quite significantly, actually, just given that the baseline is low in terms of interactions. And then we also see that the effects are more pronounced for men and those in less progressive areas. Let me just talk very quickly about potential mechanisms, sort of to the earlier point about this asymmetry for progressive versus conservative. So why do opposing comments on progressive posts increase engagement, whereas progressive comments don't have the same effects? We think that there are two potentially relevant psychological mechanisms. One is curiosity. If you have opposing comments, that's potentially more interesting, and that draws attention, and users click to read them. The other dimension that we look at is identity congruence, where we think we're proposing or hypothesizing that comments aligned with the user's identity motivate further engagement. So just to look at the results that we have, if we look at progressive comments on progressive posts, that drives low curiosity because aligned comments are not that surprising. And then the post itself already provides identity congruence for progressives. Therefore, there's very little marginal effect from the progressive comments in addition to the progressive posts. And this is why we think there's very little effect on the progressive posts, on progressives, or on anyone in general. On the other hand, if you look at conservative comments counter-attitudinal, that could potentially draw more attention. And then because of identity congruence, conservatives may actually engage more because they're seeing comments that they agree with on the post that's opposing to their ideology, and that could potentially further drive up engagement. And those two mechanisms sort of go together so that conservative comments on progressive posts drive up engagement signal. So that's the on-platform stuff. In order to understand this trade-off or whether or not there is a trade-off between on-platform versus off-platform outcomes, we now run a survey experiment in order to elicit people's belief, attitudes, and behavior. That's just hard to do in a field experiment setting in which we cannot survey all the users who are exposed to it. So what we're doing is we have 3 treatment arms where we have a control and very similarly mirror the field experiment, but here we're just embedding this in a survey. And we have a supportive condition. And we also, here, because we can control even more, we made the commenters 1 woman and 1 man on each of the conditions, and the names are exactly the same. And the profile picture doesn't show a race or anything, so that you can see that I have James Smith on both of those, and Olivia Johnson on both of those conditions. What do we find? We find that having a comment section, this is not surprising at all, having a comment section significantly increase how much people spend on the post in this survey setting. So we're talking about a baseline about 64 seconds across basically 3 sets of posts that are shown all in the same condition. And then having a comment section increase the amount of time people spend by over 25 seconds. When we look at attitudes, we again see this asymmetry where the opposing comments has effect and progressive comments do not have effect. We see that opposing comments significantly reduce people's attitudes in the opposite direction of the initial post, consistent with opposing comments. So what this means is if somebody is conservative, they become even more conservative. If somebody is progressive, they become less progressive. And what we see is we see the movement along several dimensions. We see reduced favorability towards color of change, which we just asked them, what's your view of the organization? We see there's lower perceived importance of the issues that's been covered. And then we also see people, especially conservatives, are much less willing to have a discussion about politics with conservatives. So we see that as a measure of polarization, and we see all of those attitudes are moving in the direction that's not potentially intended by the original ones. And then when we look at behavioral outcomes, we look at two outcomes. One is a donation outcome in which people could donate an amount of money that they would potentially receive in a lottery. So this is an incentivized outcome. And we see that there's significant reduction in donations when you have opposing comments. So this is comparing opposing to control, where you have a more noisy effect for supportive comments.
Then I have a question.
Yes.
Do you think that they have sponsored posts?
They do.
Okay.
Yeah. So we are not.
It's actually quite nice because in this discussion I have heard from other people. There's this hypothesis that this comment section on sponsored posts actually increases ad effectiveness and dwelling time, which you do have dwelling time quite a bit on Instagram as well.
Great.
So that's quite nice.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Is there a paper on that or?
No, it's a discussion.
Okay. Okay. Great. Yeah. Now we have some results that we can show that. And then you look at donations by party affiliation. We can ask, okay, I don't care about donations if it's just conservatives saying they want to donate less. But we see actually both Democrats as well as Republicans are donating less when they see these. Yes.
I think it's very impressive, the partnership that you're able to do all this stuff. One thing about social media influencers, my sister-in-law is a very famous one. She has 4 million followers. And she says
okay.
on TikTok or Instagram, she says that, so influencers are aware of exactly this. The more controversial, the more engagement, and they actually say controversial things and they'll plug it in just to get that engagement going.
Yeah.
To me, I think reviewers and the positioning of the people strongest when you say it backfires by actually getting people doubling down on what they believe in. The progressives are turned off by it.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
I know that you spent a lot of the time on the front end just because of how impressive it is. And to me, this is the one that'll really, because a lot of algorithms already know that controversy is fuels.
Okay, great. Great. Yeah. Thank you. I have 1 minute, so I'm going to try to wrap up very quickly. And then one of the last things that we show is we think another channel through which these attitudes and donation shift is some change in social norms. We have an incentivized question in which we try to ask people how much do you think other people have progressive attitudes.
That's the other question. I know you have one.
Because you're the,
Because can
This is how we pay the dues.
yeah, it's not fair. Yeah. I have one question. So are you running this through the experimentation platform that, Meta provides to all advertisers, or you have?
it's the meta, it's meta.
Okay, so
Yes.
I have one more question,
Yeah.
which is, do we know that I as a person am not, exposed to this thing multiple times?
You can't restrict that.
You can
You
restrict
can
that.
restrict,
So
you can
the-
put a
the
cap on
two-
impressions.
No, but that's within the campaign. You have a frequency cap.
Yeah,
You're essentially running two campaigns with the same copy, and you're turning off comments on one, and you're not turning off comments on the other.
no, so we're making sure we target different groups across the different things. So we don't have, what we're doing is you have like one set of audiences, and then we're doing A/B tests within that audience. So we're making sure each person is only exposed to one.
I see.
Okay, so let me just quickly, I know like a emotional sort of to like, I'll leave that for a question, like the emotional outcome in which we just ask people to extend the comments make you feel angry and annoyed. Top is independent. This is Democrats and this is Republicans. And we're basically comparing opposing versus support. And it's the opposite. So Democrats are saying they're annoyed and they're more annoyed and angry at the opposing versus the support. And then Republicans are saying the opposite. So this is where we think it's consistent with their ideological alignment and congruence as a psychological mechanism to explain some of these patterns. Okay, let me conclude so we can go to break. We find that comment sections are dominated by opposing voices, and we see that the comment section and the stance have potentially a trade-off in terms of on-platform versus off-platform outcomes. We find that the same comments that increase on-platform engagement are also potentially harmful to the brand safety in the sense that it reduces people's attitudes in the opposite direction of the initial post. Methodologically, everything we do, we don't have to have a partnership with the platform. Everything we do is basically a framework that can be portable to study other contexts. And I'd love to chat more if people have ideas and things that we can study here. We can think about adapting this to other topics and contexts, which allow our pipeline just allows us that randomization of the comment section that's usually very difficult to do. And then the implication here, just to step back from a second, is I am just showing 2 comments per condition. And now those few vocal individuals can have large impacts on the bigger, if we want to write a book on this, can have a big effect on the side of the local minority can really influence a large group of individuals. And here, comment section may actually undermine deliberative democracy. When we think about from a platform's perspective, if they want to maximize engagement, then they're going to have misaligned incentives against the advertisers who care both about engagement as well as this outcome. Thank you so much for your comments, and happy to chat more. Yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity to discuss this really, really interesting paper. So I thoroughly enjoyed reading the paper, and I think I learned a great deal from this paper. I remember maybe 15 years ago, Kevin was commenting on this paper and said, I wish I wrote this paper. I think today I'll just say, I wish I wrote this paper. It's really a great, very nice paper. So just a quick summary. So this paper studies pretty obvious, it seems pretty obvious question in practice, but it's incredibly hard to study. So basically how and whether and how social media comments actually influence people. Not just the correlation between those comments and engagement, but how they causally affect how people interact with content and what they think and what they do outside the platform. And so some of those key findings are actually quite striking. So first of all, social media comments increases engagement. However, those opposing ones, they are the most effective in driving engagement. At the same time, those opposing comments can really distort people's belief and reduce their support on the underlying cause and reduce their donation. Right, so this speaks to the tension, very important tension between the platform incentive and social outcomes. Right, so basically, the type of comments that can maximize engagement might not be able to lead to the favorable off-platform consequences. So I think it really speaks to a lot of those very important policy implications. And so why it matters. So the paper makes several really nice contributions. First of all, it introduces a new object of study, comments. Right? So it shifts really people's attention from algorithms and platforms to comments, right? So how other people say affect my behavior. And so the comments themselves can be causal drivers. And methodologically, I think this is really impressive pipeline that Lena and the colleague developed, right? So it's really difficult to manipulate comments on the live platforms, and they really like carefully designed this pipeline in order to manipulate comments on a live platform. So we can actually study the causal impact of comments. I think that's super impressive. And I also really like the fact that they also combined this prolific study after they conducted this live experiment on Facebook, because that will allow them to connect online engagement with off-platform behavior. And conceptually, I think this the tension like between socially optimal outcome and platform role, I think that's really important. And then it raises important policy implications related to content moderation, the ranking algorithms, and platform responsibility, etc. Okay, so coming from UK, I think there's an event that reminds me of the importance of social media comments. So back in July of 2024, there was a horrific fatal stabbing of 3 young girls in a little town called Southport. And right after this event, there was fake information on X indicating like this attacker was a Muslim illegal immigrant who had just arrived in the UK on the small boat. Right, as you can imagine, this basically incentivized the nationwide anti-immigration protests and riots, and that was very horrific events of itself. However, the police actually mentioned that this debunked this fake information, saying like this person actually was not an illegal immigrant who just entered the UK, but instead he was born in the UK to Rwanda Christian parents. However, the riot already happened. This anti-immigration protest already spread it across the UK. What's important is that it stated that Elon Musk actually commented on this original post and that he might have played a role in this process. So basically, this speaks to the importance of understanding the causal impact of social media comments, but it's incredibly hard to study this causally. That's why I really appreciate this work. So what I really like is they have this really well-designed experiment, very thoughtfully designed. So Lena already explained this really carefully. So I just want to like quickly highlight a few things. Right, so they manually curated comments, and then they use Facebook A/B testing feature to assign treatments. And then they use platform behavior setting to control exposure. And then they automatically hide new comments to prevent contamination, which I think is really clever design. So essentially, it's a rare combination of internal and external validity. So here's just a quick summary of what they did. So essentially, they had 3 stages of studies. They first collected organic comments in the pre-stage, and then they implemented the main study on Facebook using Facebook's existing infrastructure. And after that, they conducted prolific study to collect all platform reactions.
right? So it's very carefully designed and large scale experiments. So I'm not gonna go into the details, but just to highlight the amount of work that they went through. So some of my, I think this paper clearly gives us a lot to think about, and here I just want to share some of my thoughts. I think some of those have already been discussed, just when Lena was present. So first of all, I think we already covered this with Justin, and Yufeng already mentioned this one. So the design of the experiment is not symmetric across ideology. Right, so basically all the posts are one-sided. They are pro-racial justice. So those are progressive. So that means the opposing comments are likely conservative. And in the pre-stage collecting organic comments, what they found is commenters are more likely to be from conservative area, who are more likely to hold opposing opinions. Right, so this figure is what Lena showed us. And right, so then in the Facebook experiment, in the main experiment, then my question I had when I was reading the paper is whether conservatives are just inherently more vocal, which means it's more of a trait of those people in the red states, or is more because people respond more to aligned comments on misaligned post. In this case, it will be an alignment hypothesis. Right, so just a thought experiment. Right, so this is what we observe in the experiment. Right, so we have progressive post, and then the opposing comment stance will be conservative. Right, so here I'm just focusing on opposing comment because apparently opposing comments are most effective. And in this case, we also observe a conservative audience and liberal audience. And we can see whether their stance is aligned with comment and post. And then we see the data shows like for conservative audience, effect is very strong. And for the liberal audience, it's also a positive effect, a smaller scale. And we can think about like two different explanations. So if it's a trait story, basically conservative audience are more vocal, then that's consistent with the data. And under the alignment explanation, that's also consistent with the data. However, what we don't observe is what if the post is conservative and opposing comment will be progressive. And then we can consider conservative audience and liberal audience. And in this case, if the trait story still hold, then we will observe the same direction. However, if the alignment story is driving, then the effect will flip. Right? But unfortunately, we don't observe those second case. And because it's very expensive to run another experiment to demonstrate. So I started thinking whether there are ways to explore the very rich data you already collected. So here are just some quick thoughts. I think this point also came in the presentation already. So first of all, it's possible like if liberals don't want to comment but want to react, maybe you want to rebuttal, but rebuttal takes effort. So maybe they'll just click using reactions to rebut. And we know like those reactions are pretty noisy, but I think they might also provide some information. I think with the Lena and Dante already did is they classify positive reactions like love, care as positive, but for negative and ambiguous, I think they haven't used because it's hard to tell whether those are the positive direction or negative direction. And the one thing they did is on figure 7, they actually plotted those positive responses, but not by ideology. So thinking maybe they can also looking at supportive interactions by ideology, by separating blue and swing and red states, which is similar to figure 7, but just further looking at the different states. And secondly, I think the opposing comments, basically that's a bundle. So there's disagreement, and there's tone, there's emotional intensity, and there's extremity. So is it possible to further disentangle the disagreement from the tone and emotional intensely in order to understand what's driving the further engagement. And also, I think Lena also mentioned this in like commercial cases, like product reviews, probably the results might be different. So it's we're not sure if the results can generalize beyond polarized issues. So I think it's will be interesting to look at the different effects in the original opposing comments, right? So what's the effect of disagreement? What's the effect of the tone or extremity, etc. Okay, and then finally, so for identification, so the design fixes exposure, which I really like because it's really clean identification, really clean design. However, in practice, like we know, algorithms will respond, right? So if the opposing comments can maximize engagement, then maybe algorithm will adapt, will amplify, and also users and platform will also adapt, right? So organizations, if they their goal is to increase engagement, then they might allow or even encourage opposing comments or conflict, but this might lead to some further outcomes. And in this case, would the comment section self-correct, or how it polarize further if we allow for endogenous exposure, if we allow agents to respond, if we allow the platform algorithm to amplify? So my conjecture is maybe it will polarize further, but we don't know in the long run, there may be other consequences. And finally, given those, what should platform do? And should they moderate opposing comments? Should they highlight supportive ones, or should they balance both sides? I think the answers might also depend on the objective of the of this campaign or the organization or the underlying cause. So in short, I really love this paper, and I really appreciate what the authors did with the experiments, and they also analyzed the data really carefully. It's very rich data, and it's massive work unpacking underlying patterns. So my only suggestions could be to eventually have a more careful interpretation of the results, because right now it's just a one-sided, it's not symmetric design. So whether it's trade or whether it's alignment, maybe interpret this more carefully. And secondly, you can also consider having a closer look at the tone of the original comments, and take a look at the Facebook reactions in both the original post and in the comments on the reaction to the comments, and further whether there are, you're looking at dynamics, by looking at the new comment tone and stance, etc. So I think it's really, really cool study overall. Thank you so much.
I agree with all the comments. Thank you so much, Yiting, for the super kind words. And I think one area for future work in this is the dynamic effect, which you can imagine fixing the initial 2 comment and just let it run. And I think that's super interesting to have more fun to be able to study that.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much.